welcome back to the Messer Fencing channel. I'm in a really cool pose. I've got two Messers crossed in front of me, and that means that I'm going to be reviewing both of them today. One of them is Gunter with thick edges made by Landsknecht Emporium, and the second one is a Messer made by Kvetun Armory. Now, these two Messers are really very similar, and that's why I thought that they would merit side-by-side review, where the strong points and weaknesses of these Messers would be discussed. The too long didn't watch version of this review is that they are both really very good. I can both heartily recommend them, but they each have their strong points and therefore each have their own role to play. More on that later. Let's just start off with some raw numbers. Both these Messers are almost of the same length. The Kvetun Armory Messer is 1 centimeter longer at 88 centimeter, and that's mostly because the guard is about 1 centimeter longer, so the grip is 1 centimeter longer. When it comes to weight, they're also roughly equal. They both weigh roughly 1 kilo. I need to confess that I didn't really weigh them properly, but roughly around 1 kilo. Secondly, the blade are also about the same width, and that just leaves the point of balance. I'm just going to quickly put the Landsknecht down. If we look at the Kvetun Armory Messer, you see that the point of balance is about 6 centimeters from the cross guard, or thereabout. Now then we go look at the Landsknecht. Now this is a different beast altogether. You see I start here, nope, we go here, getting closer but still not there. And finally, roughly around 16 centimeters from the cross guard is where we find the point of balance on the Landsknecht Messer. So that means that the Landsknecht Messer is really a lot choppier than the one made by Kvetun. They both are quite on the choppy side because of the broad blades, but the Landsknecht much more so. Now, let's go and individually review these then. Let's start with the Landsknecht Messer. It's got a very nice blade. It looks really good, as you can see, obviously. It's got a mild hollow grind on the top part of the blade and a fuller here that leads to a rather thick edge that's been made safe for making strikes, and ultimately a rather thickened tip. If you look at the back, there's a little distal taper going on, but not too much. Let's move on to the guard. As you can see, the standard of the work of people at Landsknecht Emporium is getting ever better. The previous Messers I got from them were really good, but you can see some rough edges here and there. And that's still the case, but it looks far more slick already. So the guard looks quite nice. It's got a pretty good wide nagel here, and it's pinned at the back, as a nagel should be. The grip has scales and is riveted to the tang with these hollow tubular rivets. Does not have a metal pommel, just wooden grip. Aesthetics wise, I really like this one. It's beautiful, it's what I think a Messer should look like, and of course that is personal, but for a training Messer at this price point, it's just really, really good. Now, let's go and have a look at the Kvetun. The Kvetun Messer also looks really nice, although it's a bit simpler than the Landsknecht Messer. As you can see, there's not much fullering going on the blade, but it does have a hollow grind, and that is really nice because that means that this blade is not as heavy as some other Messer blades out there that have a similarly wide blade. It's got the wide blade, it's got a lot of presence in a bind, but it does not have the same weight. It's relatively light. You can see that the tip here is rolled. If we go and look at the cross, we see that it's made from one piece, and it's got a ring, so no rivets going on, and ultimately the pommel has been riveted at the end as well. So we've got a regular tang construction going on with the grip slabs being glued with the tang going through, and tang going through the pommel as well and being riveted at the back here. The Messer is usually not delivered with a cord grip like this. I made this myself. Casper van Dijk came up with this idea. It works really well. We noted that the Messers have this rather rounded grip, and that the wood was very well polished, which I do not really like. I'm not a big fan of that, because if you fence with the Messer, you change the grip quite a lot, and that's just so much easier to do if you have a rather squarish grip that you find on Messers with scale tangs. And if the wood is really well sanded down, so rather smooth, it prevents you from getting a good grip. So we just wound some linen cord around it, put lots of wax on it, and ta-da, you have a really beefy grip that still allows you to do all these subtle grip changes even when you're wearing thick gloves. So it does need some personal modification, but given that, it works really well there. So aesthetics wise, both Messers are quite nice, but I definitely think that the Landsknecht wins out here. Then we go to handling. When we go to handling, I've got the Landsknecht here again, and here you see that the Landsknecht handles really well. One of the big advantages of buying Messers at Landsknecht Emporium is that the people who design these Messers actually know what a Messer is supposed to do. They consult experts, they look at originals, and then they design something that you can train with based on that. So they will likely always be very well suited to performing the actions you see in fencing manuals. Handling wise, I think this is one of the best, if not the best, training Messer I've ever owned. It has a lot of presence in the bind, it has an even commanding presence in the bind because of the thick blade, because of its weight. It really forces you to fight with the entire body, because otherwise this thing will not start moving. You really need to generate power the proper way, otherwise it won't work. And you have a really good feel for where the point is, so you can do these really subtle point control actions that you see a lot in Lego, where the point stays at the same place but the hands move, and then, for instance, with the Durchwechseln and with the Zucken, stuff like that is really much easier with a Messer like this than with any other training Messer I've ever owned. Similarly, working from the bind is just awesome with these. Now, if we go and compare that with the Kvetun armory, if we go and compare that with the Messer from Kvetun armory, we'll find that this one handles very good as well. You have a similar good presence in the bind because of the broad blade, and it functions quite well as well, but not as well as the Landsknecht Emporium Messer. The Landsknecht Emporium Messer still wins out when it comes to handling if you start comparing it to this one made by Kvetun armory, and that's okay, because the Kvetun armory Messer has some other advantages, and I'm going to show that now. I'm going to pick up the Landsknecht again, because the third category I'd like to do is safety. And safety is really, I think, where the Landsknecht Emporium Messer does not win out. It's first thing that you'll start noticing is that the flex on the Landsknecht Messer really is not up to standards for competitive fencing or even hard sparring, because it does flex, but it takes a lot of force and it barely flexes. So thrusting someone at full speed, full intensity is going to hurt with these, and that's okay, but that means you can't spar in high intensities with these. Same goes for the distribution of mass. I mentioned that this Messer is really choppy, and that also influences how you can stop your strikes, because yes, you are forced to generate power the right way, but stopping a strike then is really hard. If you're fencing someone and your opponent does not defend an opening well and you're going for it, it's really hard to stop this Messer, and it will likely really strain your joints, and you might end up still really hurting someone despite your best efforts not to. So because of that, because of the rather limited flex, and because the fact that it's really hard to stop a strike once you set it in motion because of the choppiness of this blade, I would not recommend using this for full sparring and high intensity, or using it in a tournament. That's kind of the downside. It handles like I think an original would have handled, but it also means that it will inflict damage the way an original Messer would do. And safety-wise, that is not a good thing. So let's compare that to the Kvetun Messer. So let's first look at flex. It's a well-known problem of a lot of Messers that the flex is just not that great, because the blade is quite short in comparison to the longswords, for instance. But for a Messer, this flexes quite well. It mostly flexes in the last third of the blade, but the rest of the blade does flex as well. I've tried this in sparring, and thrusting someone even quite hard will get the blade to bend rather than give your opponent a really hard knock. And that is good. Also, you see that the tip is rolled and it is quite broad as well, which distributes the impact a bit better than other types of points, I think. Another safety thing that you get with the Kvetun Messer is the fact that it has a ring rather than a nail. When fencing with Messers, it quite often occurs that you drop a Messer, either intentionally or you get disarmed, and these things tend to lie around at the ground. And it's not always a good thing to stop the action, because you might want to try that nice extra counter throw that Lekute describes. But when Messers lying on the ground, throwing can be rather dangerous. People might fall on them, and that's why I really don't like thin nagels. If you're going to spar, a ring is much safer. It will still hurt if you fall on this thing, don't get me wrong. But the consequences will be far less traumatic if you have a ring. That's another plus point in the safety department for Kvetun. And finally, this blade is just a little bit less choppy because the point of balance is still quite close to the hand. So if you're sparring at full speed and you're sparring against someone who does not cover the opening in time, that means that you can still pull your strike. You can still pull that blow very easily without risking straining your own joints or hurting yourself in the process. And that is very important if you're going to be using a Messer in a competition, or if you're going to be using it for hard sparring from someone against someone from another club. Therefore, I would think that safety-wise, the Kvetun Armory Messer definitely wins out. So I'm going to get both Messers again. I'm going to go to my final point, and that is that both of these Messers have their strengths and their weaknesses. When it comes to aesthetics, when it comes to handling, when it comes to realism, as it were, Landsknecht Emporium wins out. There's no doubt about that. This is just the better Messer if you want to simulate the properties of a historical example. However, if you're going to be using it for sparring, then a Kvetun Armory Messer is just a lot safer. So where does this fit in my own armory of training equipment? Well, I will definitely be using the Landsknecht Messer as often as I can, because I just really love this thing. I'll be using it for striking drills, anything that I do on my own, flow drills, etc. I will be using it for technique drills with a partner. I will be using it for even some slow free play even, especially against people that I trust, that I know, of whom I can predict the actions a bit. But when it comes to higher intensity drills, when it comes to tournament training, when it comes to actual hard sparring against people I don't know that well, I would definitely prefer to use my Kvetun Armory Messer. So, as I said, they both really have their strengths, and I can both heartily recommend them. If you can afford to get them both, do that. I would really recommend that. If not, then try to figure out for yourself what is more important. Do I want to simulate a real Messer as much as possible? Then I would currently say go for Landsknecht Emporium. If you think competitive fencing is more important, then I think Kvetun Armory currently has the best offer. So that's it. Two really good Messers, both heartily recommended. I'll see you guys later. I'll be making more videos soon. But until then, don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.